Hi, good morning, everyone. So this week we are covering museum curatorship. When it comes to thinking about museum curatorship, there are various forms of duties and responsibilities, as well as numerous issues that you should be aware of. I'd like to list some of them down here today so that you might be able to think of these issues as an introduction to a very complex field. What is important to remember is that experiences and knowledge of how to be a curator of how a curator navigate through their experience, through their roles and responsibilities are often contextual. This also means that it not only differs from museums to museums or galleries to galleries today, but today's expectations are also very different from historical ones. The term curator comes from the Latin word cura, meaning to take care. Traditionally, this means a curatorial role is one who is a custodian of a cultural heritage institution. He or she is a content specialist charged with a particular institution's collection, and this also often involves interpretation of the cultural heritage materials in the collection of the said institution. Depending also on the size of the organization, some smaller organization or museum often only hires one curator. And this was common, for example, in the past in smaller colonial museums or in community museums today. In these cases, the curator is often seen as a generalist who cares for the entire collection and is the public face of the institution in terms of communicating knowledge that can be learned through the collection. Some community-run museums, for example, might not even have a curator, and the curatorial staff, the curatorial function of the museum is entirely staffed by volunteers. Larger museums, however, often have curators specializing in specific areas of knowledge and has departments that cares for specific types of objects or explore specific themes in the museum exhibition. In all of these cases, unlike what we call independent curator or a co-dependent curator today, who is very often a freelance agent that primarily engages with ideas through art or cultural practices, museum curators have a mandate, and that is about caring for a collection. His or her interpretive role is often bound to and focused primarily, if not exclusively, on the collection. This includes the activity of acquisition, which is about buying and adding new things through donation to the museum's collection. Or in specific cases, they might also be involved in the activity of deaccessioning, meaning selling or removing things from the collection. In both of these activities, the curator is required to justify his or her actions by reporting to the museum's Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees of a museum can vary according to what type of museum it is. In a public museum, it is often the appointment of public figures or business leaders with an invested interest in the cultural life of a city or a society. Sometimes the process of appointment is governmental. Often, it tends to be more transparently consultative with the museum's director. Private museums, however, can appoint its own board of trustees. Trusteeship, in this sense, is another level of caring, which is the stewardship of an organization. Today, though this is not necessarily how it was in the past, a board of trustees is given the power to appoint a director for the museum, who then runs the organization and reports operational activity to the board, who provides the check and balances. The director is typically who a curator then reports to on a day-to-day basis of running a large museum. What a curator might be involved in is this area that is often muddled by a number of sort of like terminologies, and these include conservation, preservation, and restoration activity of a historical collection. The terms all carry different emphasis and meaning. Conservation and preservation are two methods that are used to maintain the state of the object. Conservation is the hands-on act of working directly with the object to conserve its current condition. Often, such method can be invasive. For example, conservators may use restoration treatments to enhance the object to its original state or appearance by removing accumulated layers of dirt or adding necessary components that have gone missing. Preservation, however, is non-invasive act of minimizing the deterioration and preventing future damage of the object. Some examples might include housing the object in an environmentally controlled storage facility, monitoring the collection space bi-weekly and monthly for possible pests, practicing appropriate artifact artwork handling, or storing the objects in archival boxes with archival material, meaning you use acid-free tissues to preserve its quality and longevity of the object. Do note, however, when it comes to management of environmental resources, the word conservation and preservation takes on different meaning. In conservation, it typically refers to attempts to make human relationship with the environment sustainable while allowing for the extraction of natural resources, centered on preventing wasteful use of such resources. And preservation typically refers to setting aside areas of land gazetted as either human-free, free of obvious marks of human influence, or through which you try to preserve something in its natural state. But in a museum curator is not only might not be directly involved in either of these activities of conserving or preserving a collection. But they interact with these fields of knowledge production and often serve as mediators, specifically as public mediators. In this sense, a curator's role is as much about caring for a collection. A curator's role is as much as about caring for a collection as it is also about facilitating different kinds of relationship that revolves around the institution as an extension of their mission as carers and custodians over a collection. Today, what might fall within the scope of caring has expanded to include being accountable to the museum's board of trustees and patrons. In this sense, curators are also tasked with fundraising or writing funding applications, cultivating new collecting circles where future donors can be expected to come from, encouraging donations from wealthy patrons in exchange for the naming rights of specific wings or halls, exhibition halls. They also serve as the public face of a cultural heritage institution, and therefore they play a public-facing role in ensuring that the museum continues to draw and attract visitors to justify its expenditure. The title curator today might not be limited to those who care for a collection or interpret it or stage exhibition. Its definition is expanded to include the person who manages the archive or resource center of a museum, or even someone in charge of public programs and education programs. Despite this emphasis on public programs and educational programs and various forms of public engagement today, museums, however, are today increasingly seen less as educational institution and more as an entertainment outlet. While these are not mutually exclusive, that the museum can be both educational and entertainment, the new perspective also means that museums are often competing with other entertainment forms and industry, and often takes on the language of such industry in its reporting. Therefore, the emphasis on visitorship becomes a question of numbers rather than quality engagement. Quantitative statistical numbers becomes the baseline to judge the success of an institution, even if it's not always the exclusive means of measuring an institution's success. Hence, you have the idea of a blockbuster exhibition where millions will visit the exhibition, and therefore it's taken as a measure of the institution's success. Architecture is another field. So instead of focusing on the content of the museum, very often funds are raised, millions are often raised in order to commission a signature architectural showpiece that houses the collection. And this often serves to brand the museum in our increasingly visually centered and short attention span world. So it needs a signature architectural showpiece in order to sort of put it in the public sort of like visual attention sphere. But maybe we want to ask is, can accountability take other forms? And this is something that you might want to think about further. And must accountability in terms of what the curators report and how it justifies its responsibility, can it only be framed through the corporate language that then draws a lot of inspiration and primarily the kinds of key performance indexes that comes from a corporate, this sort of language of framing performance achievements? Is the corporate language the most transparent form of accounting or reporting when there is so much hidden vested interest? What are some of these vested interests? Take, for example, the Tate Modern. In recent years, the Tate Modern has decided to engage in a much more global narrative of modern and contemporary art. So, for £2 million a year, a rich business person could sit on a special board that functions almost as an exclusive club where you can meet other rich collectors as well, but also influence the collecting policy of the museum as it expands its global art narrative. This allows the museum to cultivate relationships, for example, with many Korean businesses, and therefore when it comes to the global expansion of Tate's contemporary art collection, Korean art became a dominant feature. This, moreover, enhances the value of the board members' own collection, since many of them are private collectors themselves. And now, the artworks by artists that they own are also part of the Tate Modern's collection, thereby enhancing the value of their own collection as well. And these vested interests are often nested and very, very entangled and complex in nature. So curators play a role, an increasingly present role in facilitating many of these relationships, and they're expected to perform in such arena, often requiring to take the board members on tours to various biennales overseas and exhibition or art fairs, cultivate this relationship with these special collectors in hope of attracting more donations as part of their KPIs. This happens at the same time as the minimum wage of a curator at the Tate Modern, for example, is reportedly to be about £20 a year. The unequal and often undiscussed impact of this model of curatorship is something that curators, long operating in silos, are beginning to challenge. A recent effort to make curatorial labor much more transparent last year includes a collective open source Google Drive spreadsheet that was created and contributed by curators mostly from Europe and America, who began to document and list down their position and the pay that they receive. What the document shows is that the pay for curators varies so much in an often not regulated industry. And there's very little professional union practice to offer the kind of protection. This struggle and fight is an ongoing one to secure better work conditions and fair pay for curators, particularly in the art sector where a lot of money is involved, and yet very little is being considered for the job security and well-being of those who are supposedly the custodians of these institutions. What I hope this introduction suggests to you is that the role and scope of a curator has expanded so much today, and that any lecture can only provide an approximation and an idea. With each context and institution, the challenges are vastly different. If you are interested in getting into the field or considering this as a future profession, what you need to do, and it is very important to note, that a degree doesn't secure you any guaranteed position. I would encourage you, however, to begin applying for an internship position in a museum because you need to gain first-hand profession-centered knowledge and skill sets that cannot be taught in a classroom setting. With so many museums around today, those with ambitions to become a curator should really plan ahead by supplementing their studies with already engaging in the sector. Thank you.